Hi, my name is Clay Tumey, and I am an ambassador for Enneagram Prison Project. As we approach our 10th anniversary, we thought it'd be good to sit down and have a chat with all the people who've had a major impact along the way with EPP. In today's episode, I travel to California and sit down for a chat with longtime supporter and a member of the board, Tara Meehan.
Waiting for you to pick up and sing.
Pick up and sing?
Yeah.
What are we singing about? I don't know.
No, well, the music, and as a typical 7, I was like, I want him to get back to music.
It's funny. I was talking about music with, we went out to dinner last night, Rick, Susan, Gavin, and Quinn, and myself, and music came up because Susan was like, I don't think the boys know that much about your music, like your background. Like, yeah, it was a long time ago. And I don't have any ill feelings about my music days, so to speak. But I also have cut clean from all that, and I don't even have most of the instruments that I used to have because I'm a drummer. I play different.
Right, you played all the different parts by yourself. I thought that was so cool, and
it was fun. And that was one of the things before I went to prison, because I knew I was going to be turning myself in and all that stuff. Right. So I got rid of everything before I turned myself in because I knew I'd be gone, and I just didn't want to store stuff everywhere. And then when I got out, I just, I still have a few guitars. One of my sons is he's kind of interested in playing guitar, so I'll play with him. But I don't play too much anymore. So.
You like to listen to music, because I remember you said you were so excited when Robin came up with the music for the podcast. Was it Robin?
Yes, it was Robin, and I love so much the song that he chose for the podcast. If I were to do, and I've said this probably before, but if I were to do the music for the podcast, that's pretty close to what I would. I mean, I would have done that type of kind of hard driving, rock kind of sound, which is funny because it doesn't really fit what you usually hear in most Enneagram circles.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, it's not really like a hard rock kind of world.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. This is the new look.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I love it too. I'm right there with you, and I don't know where he got it, but I love it. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, hell yeah! This is what's up. Before we go too far. Who am I talking to today? We I don't do the formal introduction, and we hit record, and then we decide later where this actually started.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh wow, we've already started.
So this is kind of how it goes, and there's no limits to where the conversation might go, and I'm open to whatever you're open to, and it's not like a formal me asking you questions. It's not an interrogation.
Yeah, it's a conversation.
So feel free to ask, or any new thoughts that you have comes up along the way. But first, who are we talking to today?
My name is Tara Meehan. I'm British originally, also half Swiss. I moved to California with my husband and my 3 amazing daughters in 2009. And I'm a type 7, a social type 7 on the Enneagram. And I met Susan very early on because she was invited by a friend of hers to be a facilitator for a group that I was part of. And I was so impacted by learning about myself and my husband and my girls. And I just became really fascinated by how brilliant it was to have an understanding of how I react to things, and how I could think about how my children would react, and my husband too. So then I said, oh, well, I want to learn more. And Susan said, well, this isn't my real job. My real job is I teach inside prisons. And so she took me in. And I remember she did one of those repeating questions. And I was standing in, I think it was Elmwood. And there was this guy opposite me, covered in tattoos, way taller than I was, and I was looking up at him, and no, it wasn't a repeating question. It was, you have to look into their eyes for 2 minutes.
Without saying anything.
Yeah. And I'm somehow I'm the type of person, I used to find that really, really hard. And I remember I was at some retreat, and we had to go around in a big circle, in 2 circles in opposite directions, and we had to look into people's eyes for like just maybe 5 seconds as we were walking around, and I ended up bursting into tears. So I wasn't quite sure how I was going to react to this. And it was just, it was kind of like this moment of complete stillness and complete heart opening. And I was like, bloody hell, this is amazing. And because it was jail rather than prison, it was interesting because I have been many times into San Quentin since then. And there's a certain, I found in the jail classes, there's a certain energy because people haven't necessarily gone through the class and they may be leaving any minute. And but even still, it was like the class itself was, you could tell the people who'd done the course before, but there was this sort of energy. And then in that moment, those 2 minutes, it was like a vortex of stillness. It was crazy.
When you talk about the difference between jail and prison, I know the difference. A lot of people might not. So what is the difference to somebody who might not be super familiar with the world of incarceration between jail and prison, and why are they different?
Well, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you're in jail during the sentencing period. You may well not have been sentenced. You may have just been sentenced. And you could be there for a long time, many years, and you could even end up finishing your whole sentence there. But there's this there's this nature of people coming in and out and coming and going and leaving. And as I understand it, the correctional officers there and the administration, they don't have a chance to, I mean, they feel that movement too. And so there's less relationships and probably less kindness in a way, if there's going to be any sort of kindness in the incarceral system or any sort of understanding of people, that it's not there in jail. And you arrive, as I understand it, people come in and you don't even know who your people are and you don't know the rules. And I think Lance was mentioning it with his son, right? So I think it's just a place of upheaval all the time and probably fear and anxiety. And prison is, I mean, I'm an abolitionist, so it's hard to even talk about it, but prison, you know where you are and you know how long you're there, and you can begin to find a sort of routine and decide how you're going to be in the place. Whereas as I understand it, in jail, that really rarely happens. And I think, was it in Elmwood, they had the ARC, and that was kind of like a community which provided a bit more solidity. And I think we were teaching ARC, so it was perhaps slightly better than some of the other places. Yeah,
I think I've visited Elmwood. I've never been locked up there, and I don't remember all the programs they have, but I know they have a lot of good stuff. And you nailed it. That's exactly the difference between jail and prison. With one tiny addition to the jail side of it, it's possible for you to be there and not be guilty, because that's where people are after they're arrested, waiting for trial sometimes.
Yeah. And so, it could be a long time, right?
It could be. It could be years. And in California, you can do your whole sentence there. In Texas, not so much. And then other states are different. But for the most part, yeah, when you get arrested, you go to jail. And then you're either waiting for trial or you've already been sentenced. And so you're waiting for what we say, waiting to catch the chain to go to prison. And it's a lot. It's a lot more stressful. There's a lot more anxiety, like you said. People don't always know, A, if they're getting out, or B, when they're getting out, or anything like that. And it's also where it's the first step beyond freedom. So in prison, guys have been there for, men and women have been there for years, most of the time. And so it has a chance to like settle. Everybody can just kind of like settle into their life. Whereas in jail, it's very, you might see somebody coming in who they were just free like 2 hours ago. So it's a lot more fights, a lot more just a confused aggression, and it's not super fun. So when you met Susan and you first heard of the Enneagram, was that your first exposure of any kind to the Enneagram?
Yeah.
So did you notice anything, or do you have any memories of immediately connecting something that you learned with an experience in the past that you couldn't quite explain. So like for me, I had a lot of things as a 5 that I always knew were there, but I didn't know what the hell that was all about. And then when I started learning about type 5, it's like, oh yeah, of course. That makes total sense. Do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, I think the options. And so the 7 always likes to have options, and it's this sort of, the joke is they prefer a buffet to a restaurant, with a fixed menu. And we do in our family have this. I'm one of 4 children, so there's 6 of us in the family. Whenever we go to a restaurant, there's like this massive bartering about who's going to share what with whom, and chaos and shouting all around. And my middle child actually did a whole art piece on the art of ordering with the Lloyds. So I think that was definitely something that came out. And also the avoidance of pain. Like, I was somebody who would say, you don't need to have the pain to be able to appreciate the joy. Because a lot of people say, well, you need to have the dark to understand the light. And for a long time, I was like, nope, definitely not. And whenever I felt anything that made me sad or painful, I would immediately find a way to distract myself. Immediately. I would never even think about looking at what was happening and why it was happening, and maybe that's trying to tell me something. And I think that even when I learned about the Enneagram, for a long time, I was still feeling that way. Even it took me a long time, and I think it was probably because of Susan and all her teachings and everybody else I met through the process, for me to realize it's important to look at the things that make me feel sad. Really important. And then one of the most fascinating things recently is my daughter, Orla, who initially decided she was a 3 like her dad, and recently decided she was a 4. In terms of parenting her, and also all 3 of my children, but specifically her, she had a moment, during COVID, and it was just a lot. She had a hard moment, and I was always trying to make her feel better. And so I could do it within myself, but I hadn't made the connection to actually, I have to be still and not immediately say, well, how about this? Or I wasn't necessarily trying to say, oh, it's not so bad. I was definitely appreciating her feelings, but I was trying to find ways to help her get rid of them, get away from them. And of course, the 4 finds that a super creative place. It's authentic, it's meaningful, it's a place to understand who I am. And it's funny because I've had moments of deep sadness recently, and I find with my parenting that something will come to me, something will happen to me in my life, and then it'll be directly related to understanding one of my children. And in this case, it really helped me understand her, but also my middle daughter, who's a 9, who is relatively introverted and has a very deep soul herself. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't necessarily want to be helped to be better. I mean, of course, we shouldn't really be helping any of our children. We should just be listening to them and supporting them in what they want. Yeah. But I'm so high energy and so positive that I always want to help other people be happy.
Do you think do you overrun people with energy? Or
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can sometimes feel myself. It's like being on a merry-go-round. Like if I'm somewhere like Burning Man.
That sounds fun though.
It is fun. It's definitely fun. I think it's sweet. Susan and I, we've been to a couple of events where there's big events where there's a lot of things going on, and I always like to say I bring out her 7 because 1s go to 7, mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes it's a huge asset because I can help people or bring people along, and I very much stick together with someone. I would never say, here, go and do this. It's really fun. We do it as a pair and it would be really fun. And I think that's a great asset. But I also think sometimes even in a conversation like this, I can start talking, mm-hmm. and I speed up, and that can be overwhelming for sure. And I've learned in the interim to also be able to be very still and to really listen.
So that it comes naturally for someone like me and perhaps someone like your daughter who's the 9 to just chill. Like that's the natural move for us. So it's tough for me to totally understand why it would be work to go to that, you know, to where naturally, if you're energetic and all that stuff. But for someone who is naturally that, how do you, I mean, that's the
How
thing.
do I chill?
Yeah.
I can't chill.
It's not happening.
Well, I can. I can be very still if I'm listening to someone. If I'm having a one-to-one conversation, I will mostly actually really ask them questions and have them do all the speaking, because I'm just fascinated by people in general, and I love learning about people and who they are.
Does that make this kind of exchange a little different, where you're the one?
Well,
So far, at least, you're the one who I've been asking questions.
I did ask you about the music, and I was going to comment on I listened to the interview with Robin and Heather, but obviously I was interested in Heather as a 7. Mm-hmm. And
that was right here, by the way.
I noticed that she was turning it around a lot on you.
She was awesome. I love it. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Especially, I don't know why. It feels more conversational that way. Just as a, for lack of a better phrase, just as a product, the podcast itself. But it's also more fun because I don't always know what the hell to talk about. Like I always kind of make jokes that I don't make notes, I don't prepare, and as you can see here, we're just sitting across from each other chatting. So there's a whole lot of reasons that I like it, but also I think that you can learn a lot from someone by the questions that they're even asking. So I tend to be fairly withheld with myself anyways, but when someone is asking me questions, I'm learning about them, even though they're the ones asking me. And I find that, I just think it's fun. I think it's enjoyable. So maybe in future iterations of the podcast, we'll have some kind of way to like involve more of that, because I think it's fun. And I said it before and I'll say it again. Feel free to ask anything at any point in our conversation today. I hope you feel free to.
Yeah, no, I do. And I love the fact that I sometimes say the 5 is the exact opposite of the 7, but at the same time we're connected.
Yeah.
And so the whole chill factor, you know, I realize that's important.
Yeah.
Because then I can hear things about myself that are not the sort of shiny golden parts.
Like what?
Like what? Well, I have this huge fear of being alone and of being abandoned, but I think ultimately it's of being alone. And I've been working on that for a long time, trying to understand what it means. We did have we had a really funny moment. I hope they don't mind me sharing the story, but we went to Esalen. A large number of us from EPP went to Esalen to do a Russ Hudson workshop. And it was just so wonderful to have 5 days with all these incredible people, some of whom I know quite well and some of whom I was getting to know, and just to be in that space. And Russ is just, I mean, talk about 5 going to 7. Yeah. Russ Hudson would be the ultimate example. And Laura and Rick and I are all 7s. And we had a moment, I can't remember what he was talking about. It was the heart types. And we had a moment where I think I was crying and Laura was crying. We were both sort of all in this little huddle, the 3 of us, and Rick was there sort of being the gentle giant. And we were all saying, we all have to work on being more alone. And then I said, well, can we just be alone together? And it was just such a beautiful moment. And I think Laura's sexual and Rick thinks he's self-preserving. So it was also 3 different subtypes.
Yeah. As you're the social.
As I'm a social subtype. And it was just such a special moment of being together with 2 other 7s. But also we were all feeling really sad, and that's just not what we do. So it felt like such a genuine, sort of deep place to be together. It was so nice.
How long did the sad... I don't know if I'm asking an okay question, but how if you were in a place of sadness, were you trying to find a way out of it, or were you just kind of comfortably sitting in it for a while? How did that feel for you or as the group?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we were together probably, it was after the end of class, and we had just kind of sat there for 10 minutes or so, and then we went down. But I think with all these things, I don't know if you've seen the video, it's not about the nail.
No.
It's this hysterical video. Everyone should just go and look it up. But it's about being able to say how you're feeling without somebody trying to fix it. And of course, that's my immediate go-to. And that moment, it was not like that. We were just together and appreciating each other and appreciating the vulnerability and I guess it was nice to realize that it's not so bad, and you can be sad, and if there are people around you, then it's not as sad as if you're doing it by yourself.
Yeah. I also like the question. I just like it as it's just a fun phrase. Can we all be alone together? Like it just has a nice ring to it. I don't know.
Well, that might suit you as a 5.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing about, and you mentioned a second ago about how, that 7 and 5 can be opposite in a lot of ways, but it's, and I agree. It's funny to see that so I have a similar fear of being alone. And for me, it's a matter of, I think we both share a problem and we don't share a solution, or we don't share a journey in finding the solution. So I am more likely to completely withdraw into the bat cave and disappear from everybody and force myself into being alone, because it's an odd way of describing it, but I fight loneliness by being by myself and not worrying about creating relationships that I might lose. And then the loneliness is like super real. So if I'm already by myself all the time, I don't have to worry about loneliness, because I've beat myself to the punch, if that makes any sense.
It makes zero sense.
It's how it feels for me. And I expect that to be bizarre to most people. And I would suspect that at least a few people might relate to it. And it might also be a control thing or a power thing, where I don't want the loneliness to be the result of the outside world.
Right.
I put it on myself, and then I take away the power for anybody else to do it. So, and it's not a fun thing.
But are you doing that because you start to feel it and you're like, okay, if this is coming on, I'm going to go through the fire and get out the other end, rather than distracting myself or dialing a friend to get rid of it that way?
I don't know. I think, I think I don't always trust other people to be able to get me out of anything. First of all, I don't always trust that those who love me are capable of helping me, which is a bummer. It's on me. But I don't know. I don't know that I like immediately can answer the question, because it's a pretty big one. I will say that I have the art of distraction just as well as a lot of 7s do, I think. It's just a little, for me, it's more like, instead of a partying outward energy, doing things with people kind of a deal, it's more like, what can I nerd out over? Or what kind of spreadsheets can I get lost in? Or what kind of books can I read or whatever? So I don't know. That's a fun one. It's a fun one to look at and think about, because I don't immediately have the answer to the question, I don't think. So I don't know.
What do you think about this whole concept of that ultimately the journey is to realize that we have everything within ourselves that we need? And then if we can truly understand and see the whole of ourselves and love the whole of ourselves and know that everything we need is right here, then going out into the world with that knowledge and understanding allows us to be free and allows us to be in the present moment and not project. Like, I know for sure that I project. I'm learning to project less on my husband and my children, that them reflecting my value back to me and who I am. And I get so much feedback about, how people love me and how wonderful I am. And somehow I still don't believe it, and so the work for me is to see who I am inside myself, and that all of that is true. And then I'm not relying on it from the outside. And then everything on the outside just becomes joy. Yeah.
First of all, I agree with all that. And I believe that when it comes to, especially like the Enneagram and the different types, I think we have all of it in us. And it's just, what do we go to naturally because it's comfortable? And I don't think that comfort is always our friend. So for me, the thing that is comfortable for me is why I call myself a 5. The reality is I could just as easily go out and experience life and the joys that come along with being a 7. Like if I would get rid of this idea that I have to be comfortable in my 5-ness, for lack of a better phrase, I totally have the capacity to do what a 7 would call comfortable. And that goes both ways. It's the same for the 7 to the 5, or any of the types. Pick any 2 types. Pick all 9 types. I believe that's how it works. I believe that's how we are, and that's been one of the more enjoyable things about learning and like meeting people of all the different types who experience life in a way that like I kind of want to do more of that. So like you mentioned earlier, picking, dinner, like buffets are like the preference of the 7 a lot of times. And I don't necessarily I like I'm very simple in my taste. Like I like things, and I don't always experience new things because it's the opposite of the buffet. So for me, it's on me to be like, I'm going to do the buffet and I'm going to experience life outside of my comfort zone. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that is, I think that's like a step closer to happiness and ultimately just being healthy and living in the world in a way that would benefit everybody, including myself. So I don't know. Does that answer the question?
I can't remember what the question was. I think we were talking about finding everything inside, and then
I think it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all have what we need, and it's just a matter of finding it. And like I tell people all the time, I'm not a different person than I was before prison. Like I'm the same guy. I make different choices. I have different opinions about things, and I've learned things. But the same thing that made me okay with robbing banks, I still have all that. I just don't. I don't use it for that. I haven't like magically switched my brain into a better mode. It's still sport mode, and I don't expect that will ever change. So, but what I have learned is, like looking around me and seeing, that this person from this type is living a kind of happiness that I kind of want a piece of that. So I just try to find that in myself. It's not so much mimicking them. It's just finding what I already have. So that's my thoughts on that. So the purpose of the podcast is to tell the story of EPP.
Yes.
And you told, and you met Susan at a non-prison related Enneagram workshop. Is that a fair description?
Yeah.
And then you went in to jail for the first time.
Yes.
What is it about the incarcerated that well, I don't want to put words in your mouth and say that drew you in, because you haven't said that yet, but I'm just kind of assuming that you were drawn into the prison world to some extent. And then in the effort to tell the story of EPP, like where do you fit into that story? What brought you along? And who are you today with the project?
Well, I think Susan brought me along. So if Susan said, well, I do this work in hospice, or if I do this work anywhere, I do this work in high schools, I would have gone along. There is this obviously a curiosity around prison for, I think, most people. Just what does that mean exactly? And I know that if I'm going to some sort of event and there are lots of people and I say I work for Enneagram Prison Project, or I have a tag that says that, I mean, people are immediately like, what is the Enneagram and what do they do? So I certainly, when she said that, I was like, oh, wow, that's something I never thought I would experience. But it was, Susan was the draw. It wasn't, and the Enneagram. And then I went several times into Elmwood and San Mateo, and then eventually I went into San Quentin. And I was going probably, I got a brown card in the end, which allows you to go in without having to get permission every time they sort of fingerprint you and do background checks.
The brown card is the get into jail free
right
card.
Exactly. And if you lose it, you're in deep shit. And if you lose your driver's license, I lost my driver's license once in the car park, and I didn't know where I'd lost it, and it was just like a huge drama. It was terrible. Oh my god. Anyway, and I'll tell a story from St. Quentin, because the students have often been there before, and obviously, as you said, everyone's there for a long time, and there's so much wisdom, and so we were in a class, and there were 40 people, and I don't know if someone's mentioned this before on the podcast, but if you're lucky enough to go in to visit, you're part of the class. You're not an observer.
Yeah. You're not a guest. You're in the class.
Yeah, you're participating big time. You're answering questions. You're doing, I mentioned the dyad that we did.
Yeah.
And I went in, and I was on the 7 panel. And so we teach the Enneagram by panel. So there were 8 of us, and there were 5 inside people and 3 free people, as they call us, and maybe 4, but it was Rick, Susan, and me. Rick, Laura, and I. So the 3 who we were together in Esalen. And Susan was asking the questions, and I had seen other panels before, but because the 7 is like the last number to come around, it was finally at the end of the class, and I was on the panel. And Susan was asking the questions, and I obviously had seen panels before, but the questions were being answered, and I was the last person on the panel, and I saw that we were answering the questions the same.
Yeah.
And the stories were very different. We were answering questions the same, and it was just like this. It was like such a visceral realization to me. I was like, shit. and I already had a deep affection for all the students there, and it's such a beautiful place to be in terms of just speaking with people and having this understanding about, any thoughts you might have around somebody who's incarcerated. It's like they're obliterated, because the stories you hear and the hearts you feel. I mean, obviously, as people who are choosing to do this work, and I just started crying, and Susan was like, "Why are you crying?" And I was so deeply touched, and I said that, and I also realized that I have so much compassion for all the people in the room, and I don't have that compassion for myself. And she said, look around the room, and there were 40 men in blue, and they were all looking at me, and I just started crying all the more, because it was like they were looking at me with such love and like open hearts, and I was just like, this is crazy. And I just felt, I know I already was in love, but then I was totally in love with the whole process. And and the thing I love about EPP now is that I'm lucky enough to be on the board, and the community, and it's been talked about in the other podcast, the community we've created by also teaching on the outside with our 9 Prisons, 1 Key program, the Path to Freedom. Like, any meeting you go into, any gathering we have, you can walk up to somebody and you're going to have a deep conversation, a heart connection, and people are going to be true. And when you get used to that, suddenly all the sort of banal conversations you have outside and the people that I spend time with, I realize I really want to spend time with people who are willing, even if they don't know how to do it right now, who are willing to be present and truly themselves and to listen. And the thing I love most about EPP is that it's actually a new way of being in the world. It's a new way of being in community. It's a new way of having understanding that we're all the same, and we all have the same hopes and dreams. And those of us who have been thrown into life circumstances that means they end up in prison or in jail, it could be any of us at any point. And my wish and my job is to help raise money for EPP and to help people who are like me understand that prison is not the way forward. And half the people there, all of them, that if they had been just given a small amount of love and affection, and if they'd been seen and been given more opportunities, they just get cut off at the knees and sent away and forgotten. And so, yeah.
I want to ask more about a couple of the last things you mentioned there, but first, thank you for sharing the experience of being on the panel and what that's like. I've been around a couple of those, and especially on the inside, and I guess this might not be true for some people, but for me, things feel a bit more real sometimes.
Oh, 100%.
On the inside.
Yeah.
And I would venture, I guess, to say it doesn't always feel like prison sometimes for everybody there. Once we're in a class and doing like panels, like I don't always feel like I'm being stared at by a room of inmates. It's just people. It's just hearts. It's people who are, like you said, they're open and they're loving and they're accepting us. So thank you for sharing all that.
I have said several times that it does feel more real because there's nowhere to go, and so you have to go inside your heart. Or, you choose to, and it's the same thing about meditation. If there's a large group of people doing the same thing, it's like super amplified, and you really feel it. I really feel it.
Do you find it easier to be present to the room, to the people, to the group on the inside because there are no there's no cell phones, you can't just get up and leave the room. Does that contribute at all? No. I think for me, if we're talking about something deep and heartfelt, I'm super, super present, and there could be any number of things going on around me. I think for me, when I'm inside, I think there's an intention in being there for the students and obviously for those who are visiting, and it's that everyone is. I think it's the combination of multiple people being present. It's not very often you get that. So I can do it one-to-one, and that's it. And I'm still very focused, but there is this, it's like a circle of energy and we're all connected. It's like when Susan says, put your attention to the center of the room, put your attention to book reading distance, put attention into your heart. It's the whole idea of the power of collective prayer, or any of this stuff is the collective nature of everyone there is in that same field is what makes it really powerful and really true. It's like time stands still. Yeah. That was my first centering practice that I had ever experienced when she came in to the prison where I was. And I had never done, I grew up in church, so I'd been a part of like prayer circles and stuff like that, but I'd never done like a legit centering practice where, relax, get uncrossed, and just, I always thought centering was about zoning out and like, going somewhere else or whatever. And it's the opposite actually. Yeah. And it's about placing your attention, ultimately where it needs to be. But it starts with, I remember exactly where I was sitting in the classroom, and, place your attention at the wall at the far side of the room. And then it's, bring it in about halfway and then now to the center of the room, and exactly word for word what you just said, book reading distance, and then into yourself. And I was actually kind of scared. Like I was a little bit, I didn't know what all was going on. And I grew up, in the Bible Belt, as we say. And so I was sort of like, is this even okay? But I was down. So I went with it. And it makes such a massive difference. And also just in being able to be there and to now hear what she was going to teach. So I love hearing people use those phrases because it reminds me of being in prison, as funny as that sounds, and hearing her say that for the first time. We can go as long as we want. I just want to check and make sure that you're still comfortable. We're like 40 minutes in here. We still good?
I have a question.
Okay.
So, can I remember what it is now? Oh yeah, about the Enneagram being very appealing to fives because it's so precise and can clearly be read, and and then how it can also be appealing to the 7s because it's so exciting and new. And I was just wondering about your experience, because for me, it's like anything new that's going to tell me something. I'm sort of a massive expert, not really, in millions of different things. And I was wondering how it felt for you to find that, because you could have been skeptical, right? I mean, the 5s, they're going to check it out first.
Well, I always say that I was super fortunate at the timing of it all for me, because I tend to be skeptical to the extent that I want to prove something right or wrong. So it's not, I don't always just hear something and go, yeah, I don't know about that, and then just leave it at that. I'm more likely, like if you said, that, rain doesn't come from clouds, it comes from the ground or something weird like that, I'd be like, tell me why. Like, what are you talking? It doesn't sound right to me. So with the Enneagram, it was pretty bizarre to think that mostly like all the lines inside the Enneagram and how things are all connected. I pretty quickly accepted the idea of different personality types, but some of the super detailed parts of it, I didn't know anything about it. So, I was curious, and for me, it was at a point in my life where I was just so broken on the inside, and I wanted to understand, like, how can I live like a more healthy, functional life, because I wasn't doing that for a long time. And so there's the simple part of it where I love a good puzzle. I love understanding new things, and then there was the deeper side of it where it gets super complex. It can get as complex as you want it to be. And I find benefit in understanding myself, understanding others, and just knowing how to exist in the world in a better way. So it's all those kind of tied together. I mean, it wasn't so much about the newness of it all, or like the variety of everything or anything like that. Then it was more like, this is something I'd never heard about. It's almost like finding out about a new type of engine in a car, where I've always known about cars and engines, but now there's this whole kind of thing that's totally bizarre, and I'm drawn to that kind of stuff. And then if I can find the benefit or the value in that, then all the better. So, that's a fun one. And it's funny, I dated a 7 for a while, and I got her turned on to the Enneagram for a brief while. And it was funny to watch her. So 5s and 7s are, this, but anybody who doesn't, who's listening, we both had types. So we were in our heads a lot, to put it simply. And we see things in a cerebral way often. And this particular girlfriend of mine I actually didn't think that she was going to really be into it, because she's so like distractible and wants to go out and party. And I was actually shocked that she was the least bit interested. And once I gave her like the brief overview of the types, and then we got to type 7, then it was like she found her, happy place. And then she wanted to learn about all of them. And then she wanted to start labeling, for lack of a better phrase, her friends, and saying who is what, and what is my dad, and I wonder what my mom is, and my brother. And of course she knew I was a 5, because that's where a lot of those conversations began. But it was fun to watch someone else with a very different style of thinking through things get fascinated, and just like, it was a lot of
the light bulb.
Yeah, it was like a lot of light bulbs, but like the flashy, exciting light bulbs. Like
that's what we want.
It was
fireworks.
It was, and I even took a picture and a small like video to send Susan. This was like 7 or 8 years ago, but to send Susan, I was like, check this out. Like, this is like so cool, because she was just so giddy over this new world that she had been exposed to. So that was cool. And then I think it got a little too serious for her to consider some things, and then it was no, thank you. I don't want to be, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, like with anything to do with sadness or pain or anything like that. And then she was like, let's go out for a drink. Yeah. And then that was pretty much the end of it. I
can associate with that.
Yeah. And I would try to bring it back up for other stuff, and it didn't. She didn't have a whole lot of interest after that. But I've seen the difference between how I, as a 5, experience that, and her in particular. And I'm sure it's probably not super uncommon.
Yeah.
With the sevens, you said something earlier that I want to go back and ask more about. You said that you part of your goal is to help raise money for the project, and then also to show people like you that prison is not the way forward. And so the phrase popped a question into my head. Well, who are the people like you, and what do we say to them if they're listening?
Well, I guess, I think people like me, I was thinking more about people who have the means to be able to be generous to organizations. And it's something that in our family is really important to us. And we know, I'm connected to many people who have enough money to be very generous, and some are extremely generous and some give a small amount and everything in between. And it's interesting. It's very interesting to see the different ways people do it. And many people will be interested in, there's certain subjects that everyone feels like this is great. We can give money, and, around children, around art, whatever. And I think when it comes to people who are incarcerated, there's possible to be a certain judgment around that about, well, they've committed a crime, they've done harm, and therefore I don't feel like I want to put my money there. And I can, I can understand that certainly at a starter level. And I think for me, this whole, one of the strongest things that I learned is that we are all the same. And, I knew that intellectually. It was a really nice thought, and it felt really good to feel that. But when I ended up spending quite a lot of time inside with people who were there, I really felt it viscerally. And the example I gave at the panel, but many other times, and how actually, I think Susan phrases it, people who the world have chosen to forget. And so for me, I love to introduce people to EPP because I can try and help. I can tell my story about how that happened to me, and we've had events at our house, and we've had ambassadors come, and everybody invariably falls in love with ambassadors, and they are really fascinated. First of all, they're super curious and want to ask lots of questions. And
True.
and I do think the ambassadors, in a generalized way, are so good at fielding that curiosity and possibly some questions that maybe that shouldn't be asked quite that way, and all this kind of stuff. But I think it also comes out the wisdom of I think that seeing people who have been put in the most sad and terrifying circumstances, and for them to find a way to understand who they truly are, remember their essence, and to have done that. I mean, I think for people like me who have a comfortable life, I haven't suffered from any sort of, I haven't got divorced, I haven't had any bad stuff happen in my life. And so it's easy to just carry on in that comfortable place. But I think everybody has this fear of something possibly happening, whether it is a death or an illness, or and being able to spend time with people who have experienced what one could regard as the worst of the worst, and have found a way to remember who they are, and also remember who everyone else is, and have the amount of compassion and love I feel from the ambassadors and our whole community. But the ambassadors have this sort of aura about them that you can say something. I remember I went through a phase of, whenever I felt sad, well, how could I even consider being sad? Because look at the people who I'm working with, and look at what they've had to go through, and I'm feeling bad about X, Y, Z, and, how could I even do that? And I can't remember, I think it was probably Alex, and we had a conversation about it, and it was all about the fact that pain and sadness is legitimate, whether it's because, you were beaten up by your dad. And I mean, it's an entirely different story, right? But it's still legitimate. And that's the compassion that comes from people in our community who have gone through these things, whether they're incarcerated or not. But those who are incarcerated obviously have this deep experience that is so beautiful.
Yeah,
to be with.
I would say that my pain does not reduce yours, so it's easy to compare. Like, you know, and Alex is the perfect example. I had breakfast with him yesterday, and I'll tell you something he said here in a minute about you.
Oh.
It's easy for someone like Alex, who has publicly discussed like his early addiction to alcohol, because when he was a small toddler baby, early in life, when he was still drinking out of a bottle, there would be alcohol in it because it made him shut up.
Yeah.
And I trust that he's comfortable with me sharing that. Like I said, he's shared it plenty of times already. And so it's easy to say, like, how can I be upset about XYZ when this man as a baby was already addicted to alcohol? And I agree with what Alex says. And I don't know the phrase that he used exactly, but the way that I would tell people is that, you know, my pain doesn't reduce anybody else's pain. And there's no reason to compare anyways, because it's the way that I feel my pain might be about things that other people wouldn't think are that big of a deal, but I still feel it. I still experience it. It still hurts. So, and I agree. It's legitimate. It's worth considering. So yeah, I like that. Thanks for sharing that. I had breakfast with him and I asked him, I said, I'm going to be speaking with Tara tomorrow. Any questions you want me to ask? And he did have a question. It's an easy one, I think. It wasn't, I was expecting, like, give me some dirt, man. But before he got to the question, he spent a good 5 minutes just talking about how great you are, how highly he thinks of you, how generous you are in all kinds of ways. And he just thinks the world of you. And Alex is one of our ambassadors, obviously, also on the board.
Yes.
And Alex is he's a good dude, and I consider him a brother. And I was really happy to be able to sit and visit with him yesterday. And after all the nice things that he had to say about you, he just wanted to know how. Like, that's his question. Like, how do you continue to give yourself, to just be generous with yourself and to give back to the organization, to the project, to the world at large around you?
Well, how? I think when I was little, and all my life, I've always been about bringing joy to other people, and I guess part of it was that I would try and see what they wanted. And I mean, Susan says that the social 7 can look a lot like a 2, but I would also plan things and bring people along with me. And I think as a we, not as an I. And I think I just found, apart from just loving Susan and Rick and their 3 boys, and then the extended community of EPP, I have so much joy and happiness when I'm with anyone in the community. And so it's easy. I can afford to be generous financially, and I can afford to be generous with my time. And why wouldn't I? I mean, when I'm with EPP or doing EPP things or talking about EPP to other people, I'm just like in the flow. It's exactly where I want to be. And Susan still facilitates for the same group occasionally, and we had to do this practice where we each had a rock, and then we had to write quickly on the rock what we were here to bring to the world and what our purpose was. And I wrote down in that moment, you know, it was a day-long thing, and we'd been busy doing things all day long, and this was towards the end. And I said, my purpose in life is to find the beauty and the essence of who I am and help others find their beauty and their essence. And that was a while back, and I read it the other day. I found the rock, and I was like, yeah, that's really true. And so given that EPP is the best way the work that we do and the community we're creating is the best way, in my mind, for lots of people to be able to achieve this. That's why. But I can be. I find it easy to be generous to everybody because I can. And I'm most generous to EPP because I love. But if anybody asks, I will always say yes.
Is it true what they say about it's better to give than receive?
Well, I receive joy by seeing other people seeing the results of giving with other people. You know, it's like if somebody needs something and I can give it and I can help them get what they need, then why wouldn't I? And I've been blessed to be in the situation I'm in. So yeah. It is. And what's the point? And I love Lynn Twist. She's like, money's like energy. And so I love the energy to flow, whether it's me organizing something or inviting or giving or, whatever it is.
One of the financial guys that I like to listen to, his radio show, he always talk, like the end goal for him is to build wealth and give outrageously is what he calls it.
Yeah.
And just the joy that comes along with that. It's always fun to hear him talk about that.
Commit acts of random kindness.
Yeah, I like that. It's nice. Are there any? We've been going for like almost an hour. I don't know.
Oh gosh, we should probably stop.
There's had to have been some questions that either I didn't ask that you wanted to answer, or vice versa. Any topics that we didn't cover that you want to get in here at the end?
Well, I'm just really excited about THP, the Human Potentialists, and just the growth. I mean, being on the board, that I was listening to a really interesting podcast by this psychiatrist, James Hollis, and he's talking about a meaningful life. It's on Sounds True, in case you're interested. And he's talking about having this big vision and really having a big vision and listening to your heart. And I've always been a little bit afraid of sort of the fire inside of me. And if I really let it go, what the hell will happen? But the vision that Susan has and Rick has and the board has and the whole community has for EPP is so enormous and so incredible. And I think that that's the most exciting thing that's happening. And I feel privileged to be able to see it a little bit, ahead of time because we're discussing it in the board. But THP is a for-profit B Corp that's helping bring our message and our learning to corporations and individuals and to train therapists and other people who are working in that world, the world of psychology and social work. Mm-hmm. And how it's all going to link in with EPP and using the EPP programming and Heather Greenwald and various other people who are deeply involved in that. So for me, that's something that I think is super exciting, and the vision is so huge. I just think it's actually, I think the way that our community is the way that we should all be living in this world.
The Human Potentialist.
Potentialists.
Is it plural?
Potentialists.
The Human Potentialists.
Yeah.
With an S at the end.
With an S.
Well, as I always do, I want to give you the last word to throw in any thoughts about EPP or about not EPP or anything to anybody that might be listening. Before that, I want to say thank you. I don't think we said earlier, but we're at the Old Essex home right now.
Yeah.
I flew out and then you drove down. I think you're north of here, right?
Yes.
A little bit. So you gave us time today to come and have lunch and sit down and chat for the podcast, and I don't know what else is going on today, but thank you for that. I appreciate it. And yeah, if there's any closing thoughts that you have about literally anything, and I'll stop talking and however much time you'd like, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'm going to say something that's a bit scary because it's about the fire inside. I have this idea that I want to write a book about parenting and relationships in the Enneagram. And I don't want it to be my book. I want it to be the community's book. And I've sort of said it to various people, but now I guess I'm saying it to the whole community because I want to get everybody's stories and then find a way to amalgamate all the stories and because I've spoken to so many people, teenagers and couples and friends, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. I've understood so much. And so I think that's something that I really want to do. And I've sort of been avoiding it because it seems like it could be really hard and also really big and also really exciting. But I think I'm just going to have to send an email to the community and ask for stories and ask for help.
We could probably make that happen. Tara, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
For more information about EPP, please visit EnneagramPrisonProject.org. We appreciate your time and attention today. Stay tuned for future episodes, which you can expect on the 12th of every month as we continue to tell the story of Enneagram Prison Project.